My favorite filters. I need to write a song called My Favorite Filters. Let's do it. All right, welcome. This is another tutorial, and in this one, as you know, I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite filters. So let's get started. I am in Photoshop. Ooh, let me get rid of that guy. Here we go, Photoshop. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just duplicate that, keep that background where it is. And now, one of the first things that you may already know, but if you don't, what I like to do is clean up my image. So if there's any sort of problems, like if there's birds flying in there that I don't want, or there's trash in the foreground, whatever it is, I'm going to go and fix that first. Because when you add some of these filters on top of it, it's usually going to be more difficult to get rid of them. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in a little bit and check this out. And this picture was taken where was it? Near June Lake. Yeah, Eastern Sierras. I actually took this from I was in the passenger seat of my friend's car. We were driving back to our campsite. So this is not exactly the most technical landscape. You'd want to use a tripod and all that, but hey, it came out all right. Take what you can get, right? All right, so I'm just going to zoom in a little bit and just kind of take a look around to see if there's anything that's any problems. There's some power lines in there, but it doesn't really bother me that much, And because I like the way it looks. I like the cloud structure and everything, and the mountains are looking good. So the one spot that kind of bothers me a little bit is this little hot area right here from the sun, and there's really no detail in there. So what I may do is I'll select that area. I'll use this elliptical marquee tool, and I'm going to select this little hot area right here. There we go. Select that, and then I'm going to go into File. Edit. I haven't had my coffee today. All right, so fill that. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to use Content Aware, and it's going to do its best guess to make that thing disappear. Not too bad, huh? So I'm going to hit Command D to deselect that. Now, I know it's not the perfect thing, so I'm going to actually make another little background layer. So what I'm going to do is, here's the effect on this layer right here. Again, it's not perfect. That's all right. We're going to fix this. So what I'm going to do is inverse this, all right? Inverse that layer, and then I'm going to brush that in by hitting my brush and making sure that since it's invisible, I'm going to bring it in by using my white brush. And how to switch back and forth is use the X key. It's a good key stroke for that. So I'm going to get the white in there and just brush that in. And I usually will have the opacity all the way up, just like that. All right, so again, it's still not perfect. I'll go to AB that, all right? I may bring down the opacity of the effect a little bit, just like that. Starting to become more believable. Then I'm going to add another layer. And then I'm going to grab my clone stamp right here. And I'm just going to fix a few little spots in here. Maybe this little edge right here. I'm going to hit Option and sample some things here. Just like that. I didn't like that last one. I'll do that again. Yeah. Just to make it a little more believable. Oops, didn't like that. Just like that. Cool. Just to get rid of some of that circle effect that was around it. All right, looking pretty good. Just kind of reduces that. Check out this one, maybe. I'm just trying to make it believable, or at least not that very noticeable without it being too over the top photoshopped, So there, so I got that fixed. Not too bad. The rest of the image is not too bad. There's no birds flying around. I don't have to do too much as far as the cleanup work. So that's good, because that gets us into this Well, the whole point of this video is the filters. So what I did there is I merged all that stuff so far into one layer, and this is where I'm going to add these filters I'm talking about. And by doing that, to merge everything, you hit Shift, Option, Command, and E, and that copies everything, all the visible stuff, and it merges it to one layer. Now, one of the things I do, or this is my favorite filters, is make sure that layer is selected. I'm going to go into Filters, and then I'm going to go into Nik Software Color Effects Pro 4. So this is an add-on plugin for Photoshop. So if you don't have it, definitely try to demo it if you can, or it's worth getting. Out of all the filters, Color Effects Pro, you have so many things in this one program. It's awesome. It's really worth getting it. And I like a lot of the Nik stuff. They're really cool, from the silver effects to the vintage camera thing to the sharpener and all that stuff. It's really, really worth to get this stuff. It makes your job easier, it really does. All right, so what it loads already is the Glamour Glow, which is probably the last thing I was using in this thing, so I don't need this. Let me show you the filters I'm going to go with. One of the first things I always like to do, especially for landscape stuff, is I like to go into the tonal contrast area right here. And it kind of defaults at the midtones at 50 and the highlights at 25 and the shadows at 25. That's a little strong, I think, for me. Even though I'm going to be blending this back into Photoshop, I like to back this off, and the saturation is a little bit more than what I'd like. All right, okay, so I'm just kind of subtly adding this filter to it, and I'm just kind of A/Bing it, so you can see everything is kind of creating some more shape to it, which I like. You can work with these different types of tonal contrast. The strong one is, like it says, it's pretty strong. I usually will go with the fine one, which I like. Looks like this, or just the standard. I'm actually kind of liking the fine here. It seems to give the effect without it being too muddy, I guess you can say. A lot of times I will adjust these sliders at the bottom, which protects your highlights and shadows. So as you start to use this effect, you lose that detail, and that's a good way to kind of bring some of it back. So good. So you can kind of see here, it's just adding some shape. Now, like I said before, I'm going to be blending this in Photoshop, but if you don't want to do that step in Photoshop, what you can do is add these control points. And if you click on the plus, it's basically going to add that effect to whatever you click on. So for instance, let's say I want it just in this kind of foreground area. See, if you notice, everything else in the image disappeared because it's now just applying it to this little circle thing. So we have two options: the size of the circle here, and also the opacity, how much of that effect that you want in there. All right. So what I do is I just apply it to the whole image, because I'm going to, like I said, I keep saying I'm going to blend that into Photoshop later. So that's about where I like it. I think it's good. If you go too far, it starts to look like an HDR, and so that's the effect you're going for. That's cool. I like HDR stuff. All right, so the next one I'm going to add, this is one of my all-time favorites, and I use it a lot. It's the bleach bypass, and I'll use it for portraits to landscape and everything. It's just, I don't know, something about it. I just like it. Now, you may be going, what is that? What do you like about that? It looks horrible. Well, hang on. What we're going to do is we're going to bring it back to more of the normal state a little bit. So what I do is I reduce the contrast all the way down, and I bring up the saturation back to where it was. Any sort of desaturation, I like to do that in Photoshop. So I'm just going to try to be as normal as I can as far as the color saturation. And you can see it really adds a lot of, shape to the image. And again, we're going to blend this in. It's not going to look this dramatic when in the final image. But again, kind of protect some of the shadows, making sure that I'm still getting detail in there. And yeah, so this is it's basically, I'm combining multiple effects to really create one effect, and then blend it in. So here we go. So that's looking pretty good. And I can maybe adjust some of that local contrast down just a bit. Yeah, I'm liking it. A little more dramatic. Got to be dramatic, right? Now, here's another filter that I do like to use. but I'm not sure it may work well on this, which is the Pro Contrast. Sometimes I like this because it's a quick kind of contrast filter, but a lot of times I'll do it in using curves, but curves sometimes could be a little tricky, and this just behaves a little bit different, and actually I'm kind of liking that. This dynamic slider here is looking pretty good, actually. It's adding a little more saturation, color saturation, and yeah, I actually kind of like it. See, you never know. You never know until you try. Yeah, all right, so this would be a good kind of base filter that I'm going to apply to the image. So let's click OK. Let that process. There it is. I'm liking it. Good. Cool. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a layer mask to it, and then I'm going to hit Command-I. Layer mask icon is down the bottom here, that little guy right there. And it disappeared. What happened to it? Now, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take our brush, so we hit the B key, and we're going to paint in with an opacity. Doesn't really matter, to be honest with you. Just whatever, you have to kind of experiment a little bit. Oop, I'm still on the clone stamp. Let me get over the brush. Come on, brush. Come on, brush. There we go. Photoshop's a little slow today. Maybe it's like me. I haven't fed Photoshop any coffee today, so maybe that's the problem. All right, so then I'm going to start to blend, kind of paint this effect in. And I do sometimes be kind of picky about where I want it. But here, I'm actually kind of liking everything here, so. And you can adjust the opacity of how much, how strong you want to paint in, but what I'm doing here is I'm going to actually, there's the effect, reduce the opacity over here. So now I can just kind of slowly bring in this effect, which is great. That's why I love Photoshop. It's awesome. Awesome. Just awesome. Look at that. Oh yeah. So now we're starting to get there. Now if there's spots where it's starting to get a little meaty, you want to reduce it, just hit your X key and that gives you a black brush, and you can just kind of get rid of maybe some of these little hot spots in here. Make it look a little less like the picture was sent through a filter. I always kind of look at some of these high contrast areas because it's a strong indication that you've ran it through a filter, and that's not always bad. I love sometimes where it's just like real obvious. All right, so there we go. Now, just a subtle adjustment, right? But yet it adds some shape, a little bit of depth to it, right? Now I'm going to command and merge all that stuff down. All right, so Command, Shift, Option, and E will do that for you. Now here's another quick little filter trick that I sometimes do. If you on a new layer, what we're going to do is we're going to go down to Sharpen, Unsharp Mask, and you can see these settings. They use the last ones that you used. So I have amount at 8% and the radius cranked all the way up, threshold all the way down. This just adds another layer of contrast to it. I don't know, it's very subtle. You may not be able to see it on yours, but try it out. It's kind of cool. I don't know exactly what the mathematical effects that it's doing, but it just adds a bit of contrast that I like to do, and it doesn't look like you're applying this filter to it. It's very subtle, and you can even change the opacity on this effect. You could paint it in if you wanted to, but it's a pretty subtle effect, or at least I try to use it in a very subtle way. It doesn't work on everything. Again, we're just adding a little bit of shape there. And now I added a curves adjustment. If you're not familiar with curves, it's a very useful tool to add basically contrast. You can brighten it or darken the image. But I'm running into some problems here. If I use it as a contrast, I start to blow out some of this, and I start to get more color saturation. Here's another cool trick. If you're using this curves adjustment, if you want that contrast but you don't want that color saturation, choose a blending mode of luminosity. That reduces. Let me kind of exaggerate it so you can see what's happening. So here's the normal. Check out the color saturation. Woo, it's over the top. Luminosity, it just affects luminosity of the image. So there. So I don't know if it really needs that. Maybe just a hair. So I can turn that down, add just a slight bit more of that kind of dramatic look. Not too bad. I may take out of this in some of the center foreground just to focus the eye towards the center like that. kind of like almost a subtle vignette, but we're actually going to do a vignette here. So I'm going to copy the layer again, and then I'm going to get my elliptical marquee tool. Watch this. Come on, guy. There it is. All right, we're going to add a curves layer there, and then watch this. See, if you notice over here that the selection, when I added that curves layer, it added that selection to my mask there. So if I bring this down, perfect, right? Let's go home. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to inverse this. Even better, right? Now, we're going to do one more thing with this. We're going to go into, I'm going to make sure that this mask is selected. I'm going to go into Filter, blur it under Gaussian blur. I think I'll change my last name to Gaussian. I like that name. It's cool. So now I'm going to crank that up. You can see it was already cranked up, but here is without it, with it, before, after, before, after. See? Kind of blurs it. You don't get that line anymore. And then, check this out. As you can imagine, we're going to reduce the opacity on this. Just like that, just to give it a little bit of vignette to it. I may even still, like I'm losing some of this in the area here, so I may use my black brush and paint a little bit of that in here, just to give a little bit of, I don't know, more of that stuff down there. So here's without it. Now here's a cool trick, is to zoom way out like this. And what you can do is you can see better how that vignette is working. Sometimes when I'm zoomed in, I just don't notice it, and I kind of over vignette the thing. But when I zoom out, it's like I can really see the effects. It's not too bad here. I still may reduce the opacity just a little bit. You can also adjust this, the curves in here as well, which is great. Now I do see one thing, one little issue, which is the slight haloing in here. And that's actually was part of the image. Sometimes when you use these filters, it can bring that out. So here's the original image. You can kind of see it more if you zoom out. This just this little center, or near the center, this little halo above these mountaintops. So it's a little distracting for me. So what I can do is I can use a curves adjustment, bring down the curves a little bit, a little darker, inverse it, and then I'm going to paint in that section of that halo right here. So I'm going to use just like this. I know it's a little extreme, but hey, bear with me. Maybe a little bit bigger brush, like that. Okay. Right in there. Then I'm just going to back off the opacity a little bit, and then zoom out to see the effects. It's still there, but you can see it's a little bit less noticeable. And I could spend some more time kind of fixing that up and, you know, just kind of tweak it a little bit more. Bring it in just maybe a little bit more. Yeah. So there you go. You can kind of work on that. So that kind of reduced that. That was just basically a little bit of a burning effect on that. So there you go, guys. So there's the image. There's some extra steps I would probably take, like sharpening the image, things like that. But those are just a couple of the filters that I really like to use. That bleach bypass, the tonal contrast, and I like to use that unsharp mask just to give it a little bit more contrast to it. So try these techniques. Let me know how it works with you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.